So, Mr. Ford, honestly, I'm so happy to be able to do this with you.
Yeah,
I've
it's
had
cool.
so many good conversations with you in the past, and to put something down on paper or online digitally now. So, should we get started? Do you want to tell us a little bit about Mission Control and a little bit about how you come to focus on people and talent tech
Yeah,
teams?
sure
Yeah.
thing. So yeah, great to be here. So yeah, I started Mission Control because I come from a very technical background. Had a short career in the military, and then went straight into tech. And I realized one day that I was just the companies I was working for were spending millions in headcount on the technology side of things, but everything that underlies it, everything that actually makes a real business was quite underinvested in. And I realized that the technologies that I use to build products and to build technical systems and internal operating systems and trading systems in hedge funds and banks could just as easily be used to underpin the processes and systems in a small and medium enterprise, and to support that scaling journey with good data. And so that's why I set Mission Control up, because I saw a massive lack of that. Even in companies that have got hundreds of programmers scattered around, nobody's doing the internal stuff. Like you got all the folks in HR and admin and ops all working off spreadsheets with no investment whatsoever. I just thought that was something that needed fixing.
Yeah, something that needs fixing, and it's a lot of the time it's the inefficiencies that creep in. People just think, oh, this is how we've always done it, right?
Yeah, or I'll just solve this little tiny problem that's right in front of me, and pretty soon you've got stacked upon stacked upon stacked of little fixes that now suddenly you've got a massive problem.
Yeah, I always think of it when you're working on a house and you think, right, I'm going to fix that wall, and then you go to fill in it, and then you think, oh, that's not quite right. And next thing you know, the whole wall's come down, and you've got an even bigger problem to fix, right? A can of
Yeah,
worms.
absolutely. Yeah.
So why do you think that the people and talent teams need to take this kind of step back and think about the systems and think about the way this works and the processes? What's the importance or relevance of that? And why should it
Yeah.
be them that are doing it and not the founders or the leaders of the business only?
So, I mean, I think of a business as several overlapping feedback loops, right? You've got the sales feedback loop, you've got the delivery feedback loop, and then you've got all of the different support feedback loops that make those two, which are the revenue generation and the delivery side of things, more effective. And of those support mechanisms, obviously, the massive one is people and talent, and getting the right people on the bus, as they say in EOS, and training them up correctly and giving them the appropriate tools and giving them development, all that kind of thing, right? Without people in a business, we're not at the point yet where AI is going to run a whole company. So without the, how do you attract the right people? How do you onboard the right people? How do you get the best out of them? And how do you retain the best out of them when they inevitably, carry on their journey somewhere else? And all of that is, data is so important to all of that. If something's going to happen in your business in 6 months' time, but you've got no idea how long it's going to take you to hire the people to make that thing that you want to do possible, well, you don't know when to hire them. If you don't know when to hire them, you either don't hire them in time or you hire them too soon, both of which with negative financial impacts to the business. And so HR people is one aspect of that. There's the whole kind of data picture of the business that should sit on top of as well. There's obviously the finance side of things, the operations side of things. When you've got those support elements of a business that are just run by emailing spreadsheets to each other, you're missing like a huge competitive advantage that a company that's more data driven is going to have that you don't have.
Yeah. And I think that comes down to the point of alignment, right? Because in my experience, most of the problems arise in the cracks or the transfer. When you think of a relay, the biggest problem happens when they're passing the baton, right?
Yeah.
And most of the companies that we speak to in the tech sphere, right, if we're thinking about this type of size of business, they're operating on OKRs.
Mm-hmm.
And so many people don't really know how to write an OKR. It's not just a weekly task listing exercise and all that type of stuff. And we're on target. And and I think that works in a certain context. But I think you spoke to me about, is it the 4 Ps you spoke to
Hmm.
me about, right? I think this could be quite a good time to talk to people about this, because it's at the beginning of the journey. If you can set this up, and maybe an alternative to OKRs, or at least complementary in a way, right?
Yeah, sure. So one of the things I realized a few years ago is that, having discounted my time in the military for the first sort of 10 years of being out, the military has actually evolved some incredibly strong systems for operating in chaotic environments, for aligning people, for attracting and training people. I mean, you have to be a bit careful because the military's got this very long onboarding process that they call basic training that, most civilian contexts do not have. But what the military does have is this kind of doctrine that's evolved over time around being very, very clear about objectives, being very intentional about how you plan, but not blindly following a plan. You always have this kind of reflection period at the end of an operation where you reflect on, how did it go? What do we want to learn? And so one of the things that I quite like to do is use the structure that the military use. So you mentioned OKRs. Like, I'm literally on a call 20 minutes ago, consulting with a company about OKRs. Context is the most important thing. If you've got something that's sat in your OKRs board or in your backlog or something that's just, deliver feature, like that gives nobody any hooks to pull on, right? And it doesn't matter if that's a technical thing or if it's a, one of your OKRs that's a quarterly goal for your HR team or whatever, right? If it's just the thing without any of the context, like what does this mean to our users? What does this mean to our customers? What does it mean to our employee experience? What's the financial outcome of doing this thing? What are the, things that could go wrong? Because you can always do a little bit of planning up front and think about the potential downsides of something. So the structure I like to use is, for the planning piece, is situation, mission, execution. So why are we doing this? Like, way more detail than you think you need on why the thing is important. What is all the thinking that's gone into this? Why is the decision being made? What's the problem you're trying to fix? Mission is essentially what would be the objective in an OKR. So it's, do something, buy some time in order to accrue some benefit. And you can put your key results in there as well, as measured by, ideally 2 competing metrics, because, you don't want to get people just laser focused on a metric that, if there's some other metric that you haven't considered, you actually end up driving sort of a detrimental outcome. And then execution is what, like how are we going to do this? And that it can be, milestones, it can be planning, but not for the purpose of just having blindly, having a plan to follow. I think it's Churchill. This has been attributed to many people, but let's say it was Churchill. A good general arrives at the outcome of planning without needing plans.
Yeah.
Because it's the planning process that's important, not the plan.
Mm-hmm.
And you see this in like Wardley mapping and stuff that we've talked about before.
Yeah.
The important thing is having the humans have the conversation about the thing they want to do and the thing that they're doing together, not having some set of steps to whip people through.
Exactly.
And then on the backside of once you've done your execution, you want to feed that back into the next planning phase, right? But what you want to do is you want to be very intentional there about how you process what you've just been through. So you want to process. So this is basically just objectively process everything that you think has happened, recognizing that people will have different understandings and then there'll be some misalignment there. People will have observed different things. The next one is perspective. So once you've processed, you want to then take what you've observed from what's happened and then apply it to you. So, you're not just observing random happenstances. This is something that you've tried to make happen. So what does what you've seen mean in relation to what you were trying to achieve?
Yep.
And then from that, you want to project into the future. So process, perspective, project. So based on what you've seen and the differences between how it unfolded and how you expected it to unfold, what does that mean for you in the future? And then you take all of that into your next planning process, and that becomes the context of the next planning cycle. So this works well with, monthly or, bi-weekly sprints or whatever. And what it does is it builds you a bridge between what's happened to what you want to happen. And it gives you the ability to test and adjust of your approach and things that you thought were real, but maybe weren't quite real. And it just makes you, gives you a process to follow so that, it can be very easy for the highest paid person's opinion to overtake all of these things. So if you have a specific process where, no, we're not jumping ahead to thinking about what this means, we're still processing what actually happened.
Yeah.
Because they're very different mental patterns that you need to do those things well.
Yeah. And if we take this then and we start to apply it to how people can, let's say you're a director of talent, head of talent, director of people, and you're starting to think about, or even a founder, you're starting to think about the people systems that you have in play, right? So often a HR director or HR manager picking a tool because they've got so much admin to do, and now they've got the perfect system to do their admin. But there's no consideration of all the other users. Okay, like you're one user, but then you might have 50 to 200 or 1,000 other users in your employees that have to use this all the time. And that comes down to what data does that actually hold? How much of that data is relevant? How can you use that contextually, obviously? And then how does it sit and mix and match with all the other tools that you've got, right? Because there's no point having this system that doesn't really work with everything else or interact with everything else. So I suppose my question is, how do we help people understand the difference between open systems, closed systems, and silos happening in our recruitment context? And also, how do we apply the 4Ps to picking the right tools for your people and talent tech stack, right?
Yep. Yeah, great question, and it's a very big question.
Yeah.
So the way I think about this, and it's not just specific to the people function. There's lots of different functions in a business, and generally, when you're going through that scaling journey, those things start out as silos, right? They start with nothing. So you hire somebody senior to come in and build the system, and they build the system. They build the thing that doesn't exist, that needs to exist for the business to scale. And very often, what you would do is build that without really considering other parts of the business. So in the HR side of things, you might bring on a new platform that does payroll and onboarding. Maybe it's got an ATS in there so that you can track your recruitment. And what you'd end up doing is giving the people within the function, the people that need to run payroll or the people that need to do the recruiting, you would give them hopefully a better operational tool than what they've been using, which is more than likely a spreadsheet. Which is good, right? You want to, one of the core kind of concepts in the military is empowering people to do the right thing. Pushing that empowerment as far down as you can. So, in general, as a principle, you want to give people the right tools for the job. The problem that we have in today's world is that the right tools for the job are getting smaller and smaller and more specialized. So, what might have been, 5-10 years ago, an HR system, an ERP, a finance system, and maybe a CRM is now an HR stack and a finance stack and an operations stack and a sales stack comprised of multiple different tools that somewhat talk to each other and somewhat don't in general. And so what you end up with is you get people who are operating in these silos that are able to use those tools to do their day-to-day work better. But when you want the second order information about what's actually going on in the business across those tools, you're kind of screwed because they don't really talk to each other. And, an idea of a person in one is not the idea of the person in the other. Your CRM, all the rich data that you captured about somebody on the sales journey in the CRM doesn't bleed over into the operation side of things. The operations stuff doesn't feed back into the CRM to do cross sells and upsells. None of that feeds into the HR system to give you some projections on what your demand of talent's going to be and when you need to start hiring.
Yeah. And what version of the tool they're picking as well also makes a difference as well, because there's limitations, like you said, on the exactly what it can do, right?
Yeah.
You see that so often, is that these SaaS products and these SaaS tools, they're designed to make you spend more money. They're not actually inherently designed to help you be better at your job. They'll frame it like that, but ultimately it's not. Everything's down to the bottom line, right? They've got investors that need their money, and it's driven by this, isn't it? Like maybe I'm wrong, but this is how I see it, right? It's all about
totally right. And there's an absolute embarrassment of riches coming out of the companies that build those things, right? This is the whole thing with Mission Control. The LinkedIns, the Microsofts, the Twitters, all of these big tech companies, and anyone like Monday and Asana and all these companies, they're all selling something that needs to be quite a big base of appeal. Like, they need to widen their base of appeal over time, so they need to provide very generic tools that do the job good enough for multiple people. That's the whole kind of knack of their product backlog, is what can we deliver that appeals to the largest group of people or customers that we can charge money for. So what you end up getting is something that does, the center of the bell curve of things that you need, if you do it the same as everybody else in your sector, which you might not want to. And anything outside of that is now more difficult. So, one of the beauties of a spreadsheet is that, okay, not the tool I would suggest for anything, but it does allow you to do what you need to do, right? It allows you to build your own,
it's got the lowest barrier to entry to do anything, right? Like,
yeah. And as soon as you start putting your data and your systems and offloading that into somebody else's tool, you now are exposed to platform risk. That company might get bought, they might screw it up and go bust. Especially in today's world where, valuations have collapsed. So, you've got companies out there that people have built their whole operations on, who are now potentially worth less than the total amount that they've had invested in them. And that's a really, really dangerous place to be, because they'll get, either snapped up and acquired and killed, or, they'll just frankly go bust.
Look, a really good use case of this is how early adopters to OpenAI, right? How many teams and companies have started to build stuff with that, and then with all the fun and games that happened a few weeks ago, it could have led to a mass exodus. I don't think people quite. If you're not really familiar with this, like, you might not realize how quickly that business could have been so wow to so not wow.
Yeah.
And Microsoft could have just suddenly become I think it's getting there anyway, really. But you've got to be very careful about that. It's the defense. You think about when you're trying to pitch your business idea to investors, you think about the defensibility of your product. Right. I think you can apply this as well. What's the defensibility of your tech stack that you're building? Right. How safe is it? Right.
100%. That's the beauty of open source, which is why, we try and choose tools that are open source, and we build internal tech explicitly so that the business that we're working with as a partner owns that from day one. Like, if we go pop, or if the open source tool goes in a different direction, okay, you don't get your updates, but you don't lose your shirt either.
Yeah.
And what I've seen from companies that, choose SaaS product, 50 different SaaS products, is they have, operationally fairly strong on the outside where they're doing the work, but internally they're very weak because they don't have oversight and situational awareness of what's actually going on in their business, because all of that data is then held in all of these different systems.
Yeah.
And if you want to move away from, I don't know, your ATS or something else, well, the other thing these companies do is they make it incredibly bloody difficult to do that without tech people. And they might have an API, but
it's not the same.
It's not designed to help you off board. That's for sure.
Most definitely not. And I think that's the key. And I do think this is an area that generally the industry, with talent people, need to upskill drastically is the digital literacy is somewhere I think everybody has to upskill, because I spoke to someone the other day. I was speaking to Robin Choi, is the founder of Hire Suite, right? It's like a recruitment CRM. And we were talking about what's the real problem in the space right now. And we was like, right, you could build 100 different products, but it's never really going to solve the inherent problem, is that people don't know how to use them. You could give, it's like I could give a Ferrari to my 3-year-old. She loved watching Formula One with me, right? But she's never going to get anything out of it, right? You know?
Yeah.
It's so there is there's an inherent need for people to upskill, I think, as well with this, and understanding the max you can get out of a specific system. I don't know what you think about that, but it's just something I noticed a lot speaking to people over the last 18 months.
Yeah, I mean, it's a difficult one, isn't it? Because there's a lot of, there used to be a thing a few years ago with coding boot camps and whatnot, like anyone can learn how to program. And it's true. Okay, anyone can learn how to program, sure. And low code, anyone can build their own solution. But in order to build a good solution, you need people with experience. And then there's a lot of I don't know, let's take, let's take finance so that we're not picking on HR folks all the time, right? Finance experts are experts on finance, right? They know how to do bookkeeping, they know how to do accounting, they know how to, do tax. Is it really reasonable to expect them to also know, how to model a database or how to write a JavaScript function to transform data? And, they are different skills. And, I see lots of kind of different, X ops, FinOps, HR ops, sales ops, marketing ops, all of these things, right? And they're all more tools, right? They're all more SaaS products that you buy to stitch together different outputs of different tools and present a unified interface. But what they're not saying is that the people that are the finance experts, the accountants, they don't have to be the people that build those things. Like generally there's, there's consultancies that step into that gap. And I guess from the point of view of Mission Control, we do provide tools that people can use, and we encourage people to learn how to use them to scratch their own itch. But there's always going to be that core of, data modeling and, the core kind of platform, if you like, of your data that needs a different skill set. So, I think there's a balance between, what you provide as a platform and the bits that you allow and encourage people to build on top of that. But those have to be kind of walled off slightly from the rest of the system. And then there's the rest of the system that has to be built by people with technology experience.
Yeah, and I think the point that I was trying to make was more around, I don't know what the term is here, but you know that the fact that you know enough about the topic to be able to talk about the topic at a certain level, right? For example, like you can make decisions on many, many things without being an expert on that, right? But you can take advice from those people. It's like having that wide. So what do, right? We're thinking we need to do an audit, right? We've done an audit and we've realized that a lot of our tools aren't really working. People aren't happy with the tools. What's the first question we've got to ask ourselves when you're thinking about changing the system?
Ooh, that's a good one. So I've just read a book that probably is the answer to that question. Actually, it's called Output Thinking. It's a new book by a business consultant. And I've read literally hundreds of books on this topic. There's EOS and traction and scaling up and all these books that have different takes on it. But Output Thinking essentially is saying that there are different departments in your business and there are different processes, and each process has an output, an input, transformation, and an output. So, for example, your lead generation, your input is a set of, a search of some sort of your target audience, and your output is a bunch of new leads in your CRM, right? And the transformation is, how do you qualify them? How do you, throw away the ones that aren't the right fit, etc., etc. And everything in a business, beyond the people bit being, where people do the thinking, every process in a business has that structure. So if you're going to do an audit, figure out what that structure is. So, in an HR team or a people team, your inputs might be, what are the plans of the business over the next quarter? How many people do we need to hire? What skill sets do we need to hire? What are the salary requirements to hire those skill sets in the geographic locations that we're in?
Yeah.
Your outputs are hired people to fill the slots that the business needs. Yeah. And so breaking it down that simply. So first of all, go read that book because it's brilliant and it's really, not very long, and it's got some really great templates. I read it and I realized, I'm preaching all this stuff and I'm not doing nearly a good enough job. So, my job over the next couple of weeks is going to be to really define the outputs. Because one of the things I'm working on with my stack is like, how can I roll AI into that? And AI works super well if you've got very defined inputs and outputs. So the better you can define your inputs and outputs, the more likely it is that you can augment your people with, not just some random AI tool that someone's like built a thin wrapper around OpenAI and stuck a UI on top of, but something that actually works for you, like something that can be
not a get rich quick AI.
But something that you can build into your business to make your business more effective. So yeah, I would say start by reading Output Thinking and go through the exercise of applying, because that's the best one I found, I think.
Okay, perfect. So we can do that, and that book's Output Thinking. I'll put that in the link of at some point when I figure out how to actually use the tool properly. One of the first ones I'm doing. I'll put it in there somewhere. So you've now understood this, right? You've understood these core elements that you just discussed. Then, when you're going out to the market, what type of things do you need to consider? So.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, there's a few non-negotiables, I would say. Yeah. Whatever you build, whatever you use, has to have an open API. Yeah. If you're just building some monolith, I remember a few years ago, back when we first met, John, working with a business that had a monolithic HRIS that didn't have a good API, it didn't have any API actually.
The one that begins with an F.
Correct.
I remember this.
Correct. Yeah. If you buy something, or you rent something, a capability, you've got to know that it's not going to be for you all the time, right? If your business is growing, at some point, that thing will become the bottleneck or it will become the wrong fit, and you need to be able to get off that thing and migrate to something else. So at an absolute minimum, it has to have an open API that you can pull the data from, because even if you don't have the capability to do that in-house, somebody will need to do that. So that's number one. Second of all is watch out for integrations. Like if you buy something and it says, we integrate with everything, CRMs are an absolute bugger for this. You buy a CRM because you want to track your lead flow and you want to track your sales process, and pretty soon it becomes the place where you do your invoicing, or it becomes the place where you manage your projects when you onboard clients, or it becomes all of the things that it shouldn't be. And now it's like, well, now they own you. Like they can do what the hell they want to change their pricing, and they know it. The likes of the HubSpots, the Salesforces, they, like you said earlier, they get you in by offering you something free that does something that's better than the spreadsheet that you were using. You think, oh, great, perfect. And then pretty soon you're like, oh, extra block here. And now all of a sudden it's like, you've just gone over the limit of your users. Sorry, now you're on the pro, the pro thing. And now that's an extra, $5,000 a year.
And that's the scalability part that you have to really think about. So at what point do you meet these thresholds? You have to think, does it scale? How expensive does it become? Like all of these, like even like Zapier, for example, you think, this is amazing. I've automated loads of processes. Next thing you know, you're paying like God knows how much money every single month just to execute little things. But people are relying on it so much. I remember there was someone that we before. He built all of this like chatbot function, all connected, all this stuff. And then somebody left a company, they went somewhere else, and they were like, "Oh my god, this was the everything that we were doing at this company was amazing." And they tried to replicate it, and they realized how much money it would cost, how long it would take, all of that stuff. You've got to really, really think about that.
Yeah.
Okay, so
And per seat pricing as well is an absolute
okay.
killer, right? You get this is enterprise VC funded SaaS all over, right? They get in at the sort of smaller end, and as soon as they decide, you know what, we don't want to be selling to small companies, we want to be selling to enterprises, you're either going to be lumbered with $50 a seat pricing because that's the market they want to be in, and tough shit really because they've got they've captured
They've
you
got
as
you. Yeah, exactly. There's nothing.
you're either going to pay tens of thousands to get off the thing, or you're going to swallow probably 6 months worth of that.
Yeah.
That price will be spread over 6 months, or you pay it immediately to get off it.
Yeah. So we've got this, and then so let's say now you've done all this, you've now picked the tools. What's the important part once you've actually decided on this new stack or new tool that you've decided, or keeping one, adding it? Like, what's the most important thing people should do when they're implementing a new system?
So I would say consider the inputs and the outputs. Like obviously the reason that you're implementing that is to make the people within the team or that part of the business that you're buying it for more effective. But consider the rest of the business. Consider what needs to go in your monthly management reports. How easy is that to get out? Does it have it at all? Do you need to combine data from that platform with data from another platform in order to do that? And how are you going to do that? If so, because you almost certainly will.
Yeah.
So it's really thinking beyond just, oh, this is a great tool for our users, or for our either our people in the business or our users of this platform, and thinking sort of second, third order of, okay, what does the business need to make decisions? What does this tool help or hinder with that process? If you think to, assuming that you have like a regular kind of monthly, let's call it, cadence of senior leadership team kind of process of making decisions and setting priorities, consider what they need, go and ask them to consider what they need, and make sure that the tool that you're about to implement isn't going to trip you up in 6 months when actually what they need is either impossible or really difficult to get.
Exactly. And this is one of the reasons why I really wanted to start this Holistic Recruiter Club thing, is because it's talent teams, they need to be seen to be more strategically operational, right? They need to understand more than it's not just operating in a silo. And the more they operate in a silo, the more they'll be treated like a silo, right? So it's about how can they take a wider view on the business implications, because then they're adding more value to the wider business, and not just that small part, right? So I think that's important.
Yeah, so I would say actually, I push back slightly when you said people need to be tech literate, but I think people do need to be finance literate.
Okay.
I think, there's a great book that I read. It's 40 years old. It's called The Great Game of Business. And it describes how, they basically transformed a very blue collar, I think it was like an engine reconditioning factory. And the way they did it was they taught everyone the very basics of finance. What's a cash flow? What's a P&L? What's a balance sheet? And they used that as the boundary spanning kind of mechanism for communicating between departments. And I think so for HR folks or for operations folks, understanding the financial impacts of how what you do, if you can make your team or, a part of your team 20% more efficient, what does that do to the bottom line? Because that's ultimately what.
It's so funny that I have just, I'm almost finished. I'm going to close it just before the end of the year. I've been doing some research, like state of the market, and understanding what people feel like they're missing. And one of the things I added was understanding the finances of how the business works. And it is surprisingly in the top 2 of most in-demand things that people want to understand, because they don't get it. They just don't get it. And the more they, exactly what you've just said, it's funny that it's coming up more and more and more. But I don't want to keep you too much longer. So let's give the people that are listening some do's or don'ts when it comes to thinking about when you're thinking about buying your new tech system and acquiring it? What are the do's? What are the don'ts?
Oof. So actually, in today's world, do consider whether it's actually possible to build yourself. Like, there's low code tools. There's things like Airtable. You've always got a trade off. You've got, get the thing out of the box and get exactly what the thing does. Like, for example, Pipedrive is a really good CRM, right? If you just need a CRM, you don't necessarily want to build your own CRM in Notion. I've done both of those things. You could build your own CRM in Notion or in Airtable. It would do exactly. You would have much more freedom to make it do exactly what you want, at the expense of all the stuff that the existing thing already does for free with zero effort. You would have to build, right? So that's not neither a do or a don't. It's, it might be a do in some cases, and it might be a don't in some other cases. But definitely do consider how much peripheral stuff that they're trying to encourage you to shove into this tool that you've just bought. Do consider whether you really want to do that, because probably that's for their benefit, not for yours.
Yeah. Okay. And one of the don'ts: do not take a tool unless it's got an open API.
Yes, 100%. 100%. You have to have an API in today's world, because the bits that you inevitably find things that it doesn't do that you want it to do, and if it doesn't have an API, you've got no ability to kind of tack stuff on around the outside, other than a human downloading CSVs, and then you're just into a world of pain. So,
and the last thing I'll try and wrap up on is, in the space, there are so many people that are feeling overwhelmed. There's no safety in the job at the moment. They're the ones dealing with all the people pains, and they have the pressure from here, the pressure from there, then they've got their own pressures. What advice would you give someone to be able to take a step back? I always use this analogy, and I need to find a new one, but I always imagine you're in a trench and you're fighting, and you think, if I stop fighting for 1 second, we are going to lose this battle.
mm-hmm.
But in some way, you have to pull yourself away and really take an aerial view of what's going on, like the 50,000 foot view, and just assess the battlefield and see what is going on. Where do we need to reaugment and all this type of stuff? Maybe not the right analogy for this, but what would you say to that if somebody was feeling like that and thinking, I can't step away?
I think it's a great analogy, actually, because if you're in a firefight, you need to win the firefight. If the shit's hit the fan and you've got some, existential threat, then you need to deal with that threat first. So you need to prioritize. You need to prioritize and make sure that the threat is dealt with. However, we're not in trench warfare in business. We are we very often think we are. We very often think that something that's come up that's an existential threat. We very often divert resources to, deal with this perceived existential threat at the expense of our actual priorities. So I completely agree. If you do have, I don't know, some cash flow issue that's going to sink the business in 6 weeks, yeah, sure, you need to deal with that right away. If it's not that, if it's really more of a kind of, it's just some pushy senior leader who's asking for something that they don't really need right now, and they're just, asking because they think it's urgent and it's actually not urgent, then you're at the risk of sub-optimizing like the rest of the things that you should be working on. So yeah, I think it's very important to make the distinction of, are you in a war, or are you just, making run-of-the-mill decisions?
Yeah.
Because those change the urgency, and when it's not urgent, yeah, it's often well worth just taking a bit of time, set the context, look around you first, because there might be a super simple, a super simple fix or a super simple, just, you know, in the military, it's like win the firefight is the very first thing you do. The very next thing you do is you look for a way to flank the enemy, right? You don't then, oh, okay, we've got their heads down. I know, we'll get up out of our trench and we'll run straight at them. That's kind of gone out of fashion somewhat.
Yeah.
So the next thing you do is you look for, you know, what's around you, what's the dead ground, what can you move into, what advantages can you take now that you won that firefight.
Yeah.
And that obviously feeds into, you know, the bigger picture kind of strategic planning of things as well. That's an immediate, right? The unexpected has happened. But in the planning process, you also want to consider the affordances that you have. And very often people don't do that. They jump straight to solution, and, you know, they end up spending a lot of money on something that they didn't necessarily need to do, or they could have been a
Defining
better,
the
cheaper
problem,
way.
not the solution, is to have a conversation. But as you said, it's about the thinking process. The planning process is so much more important than just coming up with the actual solution.
Yeah.
The process itself.
Yeah, even if you plan and you throw the plan away because it's not a good plan, like the thinking that you've done in that plan will still be useful, guarantee
Yeah,
it.
of course. And it's also helped you realize that plan is actually, at some point, that plan wasn't the right plan, right? So that's the most important thing. So, Ben, it's been an absolute pleasure, as always.
Likewise.
How can people get in touch or follow what you're posting about? Because you're always posting lovely photos.
Yeah, so I'm Commando Dev on Twitter and LinkedIn.
Okay.
And the business is called Mission Control, missionctrl.dev, DEV.
And who should get in touch?
So anybody who is responsible for scaling up the systems of a business. So, you know, if you're going through that scaling journey, passing sort of, you know, 30 to 50 people, and you realize that you're starting to build some silos, you know, Mission Control are a partner that can come and help you, you know, basically reconnect those silos as you grow and be the kind of tech support and implementation of all the things that we've just spoken about.
Perfect. Well, thanks again, Ben. We'll speak
Awesome.
to you soon.
Great. Cheers, John.